This week's blog post is Sculpture Synopsis 2 on the Greek Archaic period. For the details on this series, see last week's post and video. We start with a couple characteristic examples of this period, the Archaic Greek period. On the left is the New York Kouros, who dates to around 590 BC. He's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. On the right is the Peplos Kore, who dates to around 530 BC. That's in the Acropolis Museum in Athens. The dates are about 650 to 500 BC for life-size and monumental freestanding sculpture. There is archaic art in other media, figurines, vase paintings, that goes back as early as 800 BC. On this timeline, just to remind you, last week we looked at Egyptian art, which goes from about 3000 BC all the way down to almost 1 BC. Greek Archaic art covers a relatively brief period. The sculpture covers barely a century. Location. This art is found in mainland Greece and the islands of the Aegean Sea, as well as areas where Greek-speaking cities were established as trading outposts, including coastal areas of the Mediterranean and Black Seas. The media is stone, often marble. It was originally brightly painted, that's called polychrome, as you can see in the reconstruction of the Peplos Kore, which is based on traces of paint that was left on the sculpture. What are the subjects of Archaic Greek sculpture? Typically nude males, the Kouros type, or fully clothed females, the Kore type. The figures are always young and attractive. There is also architectural sculpture, figures done for pediments and metopes. Most of this sculpture was made for religious purposes, decoration of temples, offerings to gods, often after a victory in an athletic contest, or grave markers. As opposed to Egyptian sculpture, these Greek works were visible to the public, which is extremely important for transmission of knowledge. What are the dominant ideas among the Greeks of the Archaic period? First, men are fascinating. They are worthy of study and accurate representation. Also, life on Earth is important. In philosophy, we have Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, who are attempting to explain the world by reason rather than by magic or religion. Pythagoras argues that nature is organized on mathematical principles. Let's look at the style. There is a rapid improvement in anatomical accuracy from a style that's very like Egyptian, the New York Kouros on the left, to a much more lifelike representation of bones, muscles, eyes, and so on, as you can see on the right. By the end of the Archaic period, around 500 BC, there are only a few details, notably the archaic smile, which you can see here, that are still executed the same way as they were back in 600 BC. So in 100 years, they made enormous progress. What are the innovations in this period? The interest in details of anatomy and the rapid improvement in the ability to show it accurately. That's major. Big names in art? We don't know any from this period. Let's look at a few other important examples. These are the pedimental sculptures from the Temple of Artemis at Corfu, which date to around 600 to 580 BC, so they're about the same time as the New York Kouros. This stance is called the pinwheel stance. It's how they represent running figures at this period. On the left is the Berlin goddess, around 580 to 560. In the middle is the Antenor Kore, around 530 to 520 BC. These folds are called swallowtail folds, and they're a standard way of showing drapery in the late Archaic period, very stylized. And on the right is the Aristotikos Kouros, who's about 500 BC. These are pedimental sculptures from the Temple of Aphaia at Aegina. This is from the west end. We will see the east end in a bit. They date to around 490 BC. If you compare the Temple of Artemis at Corfu to the figures here, you can see how much better the Greeks have gotten at fitting figures into a triangular space. Instead of just making the men smaller, they're doing different poses that make them fit into the angle. This is the figure over here. Where would you go if you wanted to see the originals of Archaic Greek art? You would go to the Acropolis Museum in Athens, the National Museum in Athens, and the Delphi Archaeological Museum, which has a pair of twin Kouroi figures. A few suggestions for further reading. Boardman and Richter are both classic handbooks of Greek art. Innovators in Sculpture has one chapter on the Archaic period innovations. And for fun, there is Mary Renault's The Praise Singer, which came out in 1978. Renault was one of the great writers of historical fiction, and she set many of her works in ancient Greece. The main character in The Praise Singer is Simonides of Chios, who lived around 556 to 469 BC. He was a lyric poet in the period when mainland Greece and the Greek colonies in Ionia, modern Turkey, were still under the rule of tyrants. This is one of my favorite passages from The Praise Singer. Quote, "Tell a man what he may not sing, and he is still half free, even all free if he never wanted to sing it. But tell him what he must sing. Take up his time with it so his true voice cannot sound even in secret. There, I have seen, is slavery." End of quote. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. The Sunday recommendations list is where that blurb on The Praise Singer came from. You can join that by visiting the URL on screen or emailing me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.